Introduction. There are stories we inherit and others that find us. This is a story about memory, silence, and the weight of things passed down without explanation. About the way objects carry echoes and how a single moment, an unexpected meeting, a familiar shape, a laugh at the wrong time can unravel everything we thought we knew. It begins in an antique store in Calgary with a woman, a man, and a wooden rocking horse with more history than it ever let on. What followed was never meant to happen, but sometimes fate doesn't care about what's meant. It only cares about what is. This story is not just about love, or family, or secrets. It's about all the places those things overlap, and what we're left with when the truth finally surfaces. Chapter 1. The Antique Store. Calgary's winter air bit through Sarah's coat as she pushed open the heavy wooden door of Timeless Treasures, a tucked-away antique shop on the edge of downtown. The bell above the door jingled gently, and the smell of aged wood and leather filled her senses. She wasn't looking for anything in particular, just an excuse to not go home to another quiet evening alone. Rows of ornate mirrors, dusty books, and forgotten furniture crowded the dimly lit store. But one object pulled her in like a whisper from the past. A rocking horse. Faded white with hand-painted roses along its body, the horse stood proudly near a fireplace set. The paint was chipped, the tail frayed, but it radiated warmth and memory. She approached it slowly, ran her fingers over the cracked wood, and, half laughing at herself, sat down gently. It creaked as she began to rock. "Looks like it's found a rider again," a voice said behind her. Startled, Sarah turned and saw a man around her age, tall with a strong jaw and curious brown eyes. He smiled, stepping in from the cold and brushing snow off his jacket. She laughed softly. "Guess I couldn't resist." "Can't blame you. That thing's got character," he said, approaching. "I'm Daniel, by the way." "Sarah," she replied, offering a hand. "You into antiques?" "I'm more into random places. I let Google Maps guide me when I'm bored." She grinned. "You let algorithms run your life?" "Only when it leads me to mysterious women riding old rocking horses." They both laughed, and something clicked. The world outside the store faded away as they talked, about music, travel, work, the kind of conversation that felt like it was picking up from somewhere they'd left off, even if they'd never met before. As Sarah stood to leave, Daniel asked, "Can I see you again?" She hesitated, heart thumping unexpectedly. "Yeah, I'd like that." They exchanged numbers. As she stepped back into the cold, Sarah glanced over her shoulder. Daniel was still standing by the rocking horse, watching her with a strange, thoughtful look, like something about that horse stirred something in him too. She shook it off, pulling her scarf tighter. Neither of them knew their lives had just changed forever. Chapter 2. Coffee and Connection. They met the next afternoon at a cafe nestled in a corner of Stephen Avenue, one of those quiet spots where the hum of the espresso machine and the soft jazz in the background created the perfect mood for conversation. Sarah arrived first, her nerves disguised beneath a warm smile and a carefully chosen beige sweater. She had barely sat down when Daniel walked in, that same easy grin on his face, eyes lighting up when he saw her. "Hey," he said, brushing snow from his shoulders as he took the seat across from her. "Good to see you again. I was half worried, I imagined, yesterday." Sarah laughed. "Nope, I'm real, and still slightly embarrassed about being caught riding a rocking horse." "Don't be. Honestly, that made my day," he said. "It reminded me of something, actually. I don't know." The horse looked familiar. She raised an eyebrow. "Familiar how?" "I used to have a rocking horse like that as a kid. Well, my grandmother had it in her house. I remember riding it every time we visited. It had these little rose patterns on the side, just like that one." Weird, huh? Sarah leaned in. That's actually kind of spooky. You think it could be the same one? He shrugged. Could be. My grandma passed away a long time ago. My family had this big yard sale when they were clearing out her house. That horse could have ended up anywhere. Wow, that'd be a crazy coincidence. Their drinks arrived, Sarah's lavender latte and Daniel's black coffee, and the conversation shifted. They talked about jobs, childhood stories, and funny travel disasters. Daniel shared how he worked in freelance design and often travelled for projects, while Sarah confessed to writing lifestyle articles for a small online magazine. You always been in Calgary? He asked. Moved here 4 years ago. I was in Edmonton before that, needed a change. You? Born here mostly, though we moved around a lot. My mom's Jamaican, my dad's Canadian. They split when I was 10. Sorry to hear that. He waved it off. No worries, it was a long time ago. They're cool now, believe it or not. They smiled at each other, the kind of smile that lingers a few seconds longer than usual. When the conversation hit a natural pause, Daniel said, You know what? This feels easy. Like I've known you longer than a day. Sarah nodded. I was just thinking the same thing. It's comfortable. In a good way. The snow outside thickened as the afternoon wore on, but neither of them noticed. They stayed until the cafe began dimming the lights for the evening crowd, sipping lukewarm drinks and soaking in the warmth of something new, something rare. As they stepped out into the crisp air, Daniel offered his arm. Can I walk you home? Sarah hesitated, then slid her hand through his elbow. Sure. They walked through the snow-dusted streets, talking about everything and nothing at all. And when they reached her apartment building, they stood there for a moment, just looking at each other. I had a great time, he said. Me too. I'd really like to see you again, she smiled. You will. He leaned in and kissed her on the cheek, then turned and walked into the night, leaving Sarah on the doorstep with her heart fluttering and her fingers still tingling from where they'd touched. Somewhere, tucked in the corner of her mind, the image of that rocking horse flickered, but only faintly. Chapter 3, First Date. Daniel texted Sarah the next morning. I owe you dinner. Let me take you somewhere special tonight. She smiled as she read the message, heart doing that little skip again. You're on. I like surprises. By 6:30, Daniel was waiting outside her apartment in a charcoal wool coat and a scarf his mum had knitted. Sarah stepped out wearing a wine-coloured dress under a long beige trench, her curls pinned half up, cheeks flushed from the cold. You clean up well, he said with a grin, opening the passenger door for her. I do my best, she said, returning the smile. Where are we going? You'll see. They drove into the heart of the city, where Christmas lights were already beginning to flicker on storefronts and lampposts. Daniel parked near a cosy Italian bistro tucked between two old bookstores. Inside, it was warm and dimly lit, with soft violin music playing in the background and the smell of garlic and herbs floating through the air. Over pasta and red wine, the conversation flowed even easier than before. They laughed about awkward teenage phases, worst jobs they'd ever had, and shared quiet, meaningful things too, like how Sarah always wrote better when it rained, or how Daniel kept a sketchbook of ideas he was too nervous to show anyone. I like the way you see the world, she said, stirring the last of her tiramisu. It's kind of wide open. He leaned forward slightly. And I like how you notice small things, like that banged-up rocking horse. I walked right past it. It just felt, I don't know, sad, like it had stories. Daniel tilted his head. You ever wonder if people have been in our lives before, like maybe in another version of this world we've already met? Sarah laughed softly. Okay, now you're getting poetic. He smiled. Maybe I am. You bring that out in me. Later that evening, after the bill had been paid and the snow had begun to fall again in thick, lazy flakes, they walked along the Bow River path. The trees sparkled with string lights, and the distant buzz of the city was muted under the blanket of winter. "I don't want tonight to end," Sarah said. "Then it won't," Daniel replied. He took her hand, warm, steady, and pulled her gently closer. They stood under a willow tree, its bare branches swaying in the wind, and he kissed her. Slow, deliberate, full of wonder. It was the kind of kiss that came with silence afterward, as if the world paused to breathe with them. When they finally pulled apart, Sarah looked up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is kind of terrifying." He smiled softly. "Yeah, but I think it's worth it." And she believed him. Chapter 4. The Rocking Horse Mystery. The snow hadn't let up for days, but Sarah didn't mind. Inside her apartment, the windows fogged slightly as she sipped hot cocoa and hummed along to a soul playlist in the background. She was tidying up, folding throw blankets, wiping her coffee table, when her phone buzzed. Daniel, still thinking about that kiss. "You busy tonight?" She grinned. "Sarah, come over. I've got snacks and bad movies." By evening, Daniel was at her door with 2 bags of kettle popcorn and a bottle of red wine. He kicked off his boots and flopped down beside her on the couch like he'd always belonged there. It felt so natural, like they had months of routine between them instead of just a few days. Halfway through a cheesy 90s horror flick, Sarah nudged him. "Want to see something?" Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Always." She stood and crossed the room, pulling a blanket off something in the corner. There it was, the rocking horse, sitting silent and regal, its carved face almost watching them. "I brought it home from the store," she said. The owner was practically giving it away. Daniel stood up and walked over to it slowly, eyes narrowing. "That's it," he murmured. "That's the one my grandmother had." "You're sure?" He knelt down, brushing his hand along the underside of the saddle. "I remember this tiny crack right here. I cut my hand on it once as a kid." Sarah crouched beside him. "That's kind of amazing." He looked at her, brow furrowed. "What are the odds of this?" "I don't know, but it feels like more than coincidence." Daniel didn't say anything right away. He just stared at the horse, eyes distant. "I used to spend weekends at my grandma's place when I was little," he finally said. "She'd read stories to me while I rocked on this thing. Then one summer we stopped going. I didn't even know why. My mum said something happened with the family, a falling out. Do you ever ask her what it was about?" He nodded slowly. "She always dodged it, said it was complicated. I figured it didn't matter anymore." Sarah looked at him, something stirring in her chest. "Do you think this horse ended up here for a reason?" Daniel chuckled lightly, the tension breaking. "What, like fate?" She shrugged, smiling. "Maybe. Or maybe it's just a really well-traveled piece of furniture." Still, they both glanced at the horse again. Its carved eyes seemed deeper now, like it was holding on to memories of another time. Later, after the wine was half gone and they were curled up on the couch, Daniel pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "I don't care how weird it is," he said. "I'm glad we met." Sarah nestled into him. "Me too." The rocking horse stood quiet in the corner, a silent witness to something that had just begun, and something buried deep in the past, slowly rising to the surface. Chapter 5. Intimacy and Secrets. Weeks passed, and winter wrapped Calgary in a blanket of white silence. For Sarah and Daniel, the days blurred together in warmth, laughter, and long conversations that stretched into the early morning. What started as chance attraction had become something deeper, more rooted, a kind of love that sneaks up when you're not looking for it. Sarah hadn't let anyone in like this for a long time. Daniel cooked for her on Thursday nights, always experimenting. Chicken curry one week, grilled salmon the next. They'd stay up after dinner, slow dancing in the living room, sometimes in silence, sometimes to old soul records she'd collected. She'd write while he sketched, both of them lost in their crafts, sharing the same space like two branches on the same tree. The intimacy crept in like a tide, soft, patient, inevitable. One night, after a snowstorm painted the city in silver, Daniel spent the night for the first time. They made love, slowly, nervously at first, but then without hesitation. No games, no masks, just honesty and breath and connection. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, watching the ceiling like it held secrets. Daniel brushed her hair off her forehead. I've never felt this safe with anyone. Sarah turned toward him. Me neither. You make it easy to be myself. He kissed her, then pulled her against his chest. It's kind of terrifying, isn't it? She smiled into his skin. Terrifying in the best way. A few days later, Daniel sat at his kitchen table, flipping through an old family photo album he hadn't opened in years. Something about that rocking horse kept picking at the back of his mind. He found a faded photo of his grandmother's living room. There it was, the same horse, identical in every detail. He traced the edges of the image, heart beating a little faster. He called his mom. Hey, Ma, you remember that rocking horse Grandma used to have? A pause. Of course. Why? I think I found it. Another pause, this time longer. You're kidding. I'm not kidding, it's at Sarah's place. Sarah. Her tone changed. Your girlfriend? Yeah. A beat of silence, then lightly. That's interesting. Daniel frowned. What does that mean? Nothing, just odd how that thing resurfaced. She changed the subject quickly, but something in her voice stuck with him. That weekend, Sarah was at her laptop researching for a new article and, on a whim, typed into Google, how to trace antique origins in Calgary. She didn't know why she searched it. Something about the horse still pulled at her, like a half-remembered dream. The antique store owner hadn't known much, just said it came from a house sale in the northwest and had changed hands a few times. She bookmarked a few websites and leaned back. In the quiet of the apartment, she looked toward the corner where the rocking horse now stood near the window. It almost looked different in the daylight. Older, heavier somehow. Later that night, they sat on her couch watching a documentary, legs tangled under a blanket. Sarah turned to him. Do you believe everything happens for a reason? Daniel looked at her carefully. You mean us? She nodded. I don't know, he said slowly. Maybe. Or maybe we're just really lucky. She wanted to believe that. She really did. But for the first time, something in her chest tightened. Just a little. A flutter of anxiety. Like something was just out of view, waiting. Chapter 6. A Whisper from the Past. Sarah met Leah 2 months ago through work. At first, it was just small talk in Zoom meetings and occasional Slack messages. But over time, they found themselves bonding over playlists, memes, and mutual disdain for annoying editors. When Sarah invited her over for brunch one chilly Saturday, Leah arrived wrapped in a faux fur jacket and holding 2 oversized matcha lattes. Brunch with my favorite chaotic queen, she said, air-kissing the room. God, your place is so vibe. Daniel was already at the kitchen counter flipping pancakes. Leah's eyes lit up when she saw him. Ooh, who's this? The mystery man finally revealed. Sarah laughed. Leah, this is Daniel. Daniel, this is my co-worker / part-time therapist / brunch enabler. They clicked instantly. Leah was witty and blunt, never afraid to ask personal questions, which made Daniel both laugh and squirm. You two are disgustingly cute, she said, sipping her drink. Honestly, I've seen fake relationships on Instagram with less chemistry. You're not faking this for content, are you? Daniel smirked. We're not that creative. As the 3 of them ate, talked, and laughed, Leah's phone never left her side. She snapped a picture of the table and posted it to her Instagram story, brunching with power couple and pancakes. Sarah didn't mind. Leah always posted everything. Later, when Daniel stepped out to take a call, Leah leaned in. You really like him, huh? Sarah blushed. Yeah, I do. It's scary how fast it's happened. Leah tilted her head, her expression softer than usual. Sometimes the right ones feel like that. It's okay to fall hard, as long as you've checked he's not secretly married or your cousin. Sarah laughed. Trust me, we're safe. That night, Daniel sat on his balcony alone, scrolling through his phone. The photo of the rocking horse still sat in his gallery. He kept looking at it, drawn to something he couldn't name. He dialed his mother again. Okay, he said when she picked up. I need real answers. What happened with the family? Who did we lose? She sighed. I told you, Daniel. There were tensions. After your grandmother died, things fell apart. Your aunt, my sister, left. She had a child. No one ever heard from her again. Daniel sat up. What was her name? Monica, she said. Your grandmother never forgave her for leaving. A long silence. I think, she continued. If anyone knows more, it's your Uncle James. He was closer to Monica than the rest of us. He's still in Jamaica. Daniel stared out into the night. I think it's time I called him. Meanwhile, Sarah was sitting at her desk, scrolling through records online. She'd contacted the antique shop owner, who finally sent over a scanned invoice from the person who had sold the rocking horse years ago. The name printed neatly on the paper. Monica Blake? Sarah blinked. That was her mother's maiden name. Chapter 7. Uncle James. Daniel hesitated before dialing the international number. He hadn't spoken to his Uncle James in years, more out of distance than conflict. James had always been the eccentric one in the family, wise, warm, and full of stories. He lived in Jamaica, in the hills outside Montego Bay, in a house full of plants and memories. The phone rang twice before a voice picked up. Daniel? Is that you, me boy? Daniel smiled. Hey, Uncle, yeah, it's me. Lord, it's been long. How's Canada treating ya? Cold still? Always, Daniel chuckled. Uncle, I need to ask you something serious. There was a beat of silence. I'm listening. Daniel explained everything. The rocking horse, the memories, the invoice Sarah found with the name Monica Blake on it, the fact that he was dating Sarah, and how weird everything was starting to feel. James didn't interrupt once. When Daniel finally stopped, his uncle exhaled sharply. I was wondering when this would come back around, he said. Daniel, your mother and Monica, they were sisters. Twins, actually. Identical, but nothing alike in spirit. Daniel blinked. Twins? Monica disappeared from the family when you were still a baby. She was pregnant. Nobody knew who the father was. There was scandal, shame. Your grandmother didn't take it well. Monica left Jamaica and never came back. That rocking horse. It was hers first. Gift from your grandfather. Daniel rubbed his forehead. What the heck? I remember she took it with her when she left. Said she wanted something to hold on to. I never knew what happened to her after. We tried, but she didn't want to be found. Daniel's heart was pounding now. If Sarah is Monica's daughter, James paused, then she's your cousin. Or worse. Daniel swallowed hard. Uncle, will you come to Canada? I'll come, James said without hesitation. There's more to this than I ever understood, and it's time the family faced it. Meanwhile, Sarah and Leah sat on the balcony of a downtown cafe, sipping chai lattes as snow drifted down like confetti. Leah had become a regular in their lives, often joining for dinners, movie nights, and spontaneous outings. You've been quiet, Leah said, nudging Sarah playfully. Thinking about Loverboy? Sarah smiled but didn't meet her eyes. Yeah, just there's a lot going on. Leah leaned back, adjusting her sunglasses. You two seriously planning long-term? Sarah paused. We've talked about it. That's kind of wild. Fast, don't you think? It doesn't feel fast, it just feels right. Leah nodded, sipping her drink. You know I'm happy for you, it's just me being nosy, but I notice Daniel gets weird when you bring up family stuff. Sarah looked at her surprised. We've both been digging into family history lately. It's nothing weird. Mm-hmm, Leah smirked. Just saying, keep your eyes open, babe. Later that evening, Sarah and Daniel lay in bed together, the room quiet except for the hum of the heating vent. He held her like he never wanted to let go. There's something I need to tell you, he whispered. She turned to him, sleepy but present. What is it? I talked to my uncle today. He's coming to Canada. Oh? She asked. Why? Daniel hesitated. He knows things about my family, stuff I've never been told. I think he can help me understand some of what's been missing. Sarah nodded slowly. I've been doing some digging, too. That name on the invoice, Monica Blake, that was my mom's name. Before she passed. Their eyes met. Something clicked, something terrifying. Neither of them had spoken. Not yet. Chapter 8. The Photo. Daniel found it tucked in the back of an old cigar box his mother had sent years ago, something she said he should look through when he was ready for family history. At the time, he'd barely glanced at the contents. Now, after his conversation with Uncle James, it felt like the box had been waiting. He flipped through yellowed letters, ticket stubs, and fading black and white prints until one photo caught his eye. It was a woman, unmistakably his grandmother, sitting on a porch swing, smiling at the camera. In her lap was a baby girl wrapped in a crocheted blanket. Scribbled on the back in elegant cursive. Monica, 1996. The handwriting was familiar, his grandmother's, but it was the baby that held his focus. There was something about her face, her cheeks, the shape of her eyes. Something familiar. Something that looked like Sarah. He set the photo down slowly, heart pounding. At Sarah's apartment later that evening, they sat cross-legged on the floor, Chinese takeout containers scattered around them, soft jazz humming from her speaker. The snow was falling again outside the window, but the warmth inside was thick and cozy. Daniel pulled the photo from his coat pocket. I found something, he said quietly, sliding it across the floor to her. Sarah picked it up, studying it. That's your grandmother? He nodded. And Monica, my aunt, taken in Jamaica. She stared at the baby, her breath caught. That looks like... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Daniel moved closer. You said Monica was your mom's name before she passed, right? Yeah, she said. But I think it would be better if we talked to Uncle James. Across town, Leah was editing audio from her latest podcast episode. She paused the file mid-sentence, tapping her pen against her lip. Something about Sarah and Daniel was nagging at her. She'd seen the way their mood shifted recently, especially when family came up. Sarah had mentioned the name Monica a few times in passing. Then there was the old rocking horse, which Sarah kept saying was more than just decoration. Leah clicked open her notes app and typed, Monica Blake, Sarah's mum. Connection to Daniel? She wasn't trying to dig. Not yet. But part of her couldn't help it. Curiosity was second nature, and she'd always had a nose for stories that people didn't want told. Back at the apartment, Daniel and Sarah lay in bed, facing each other, the photo between them on the nightstand like a silent intruder. I keep thinking maybe we're wrong, Sarah whispered. Daniel reached out, brushing her knuckles with his. Maybe we are. But if we're not, I still don't regret meeting you. She blinked away a tear. I don't either. He leaned in and kissed her softly, as if trying to press pause on the world. But the truth was getting louder, and soon it would demand to be heard. Chapter 9. The Visit. It was the first time in nearly 20 years that Uncle James had set foot in Canada. The cold hit him like a slap when he stepped out of the airport, but his eyes were bright, and his presence filled the arrival gate with quiet energy. Daniel spotted him right away. Same salt and pepper beard, same slow walk with hands tucked behind his back, like he was strolling through memory. "Me nephew," James said, pulling Daniel into a hug. "You've grown into a man, I see." Daniel grinned. "I've had a bit of time." James pulled back, eyes scanning his face. "I can see it. Your mother's features, but your grandfather's fire. Come, let's talk." Sarah brewed a pot of ginger tea while Daniel helped James get settled in the living room. The rocking horse sat in its corner like it had been waiting. When James saw it, he stopped mid-step. "My God," he whispered. "That's the one." He walked to it slowly like approaching an altar and ran his fingers along the curved neck. "Your grandmother gave this to Monica when she was just a girl. Your grandfather carved it by hand. It's been in the family longer than you know." Sarah joined them, quiet and nervous. James turned to her. "You must be Sarah." "I am," she said softly. "Thank you for coming." "I didn't come just for Daniel. I came for you too." He sat, eyes thoughtful. "I've been thinking about Monica ever since he called. I kept all her letters, even the one she sent before she disappeared." Sarah's heart skipped. "You have them?" James nodded. "Locked in a box at home, but I remember the last thing she wrote. She said she was scared, that no one wanted her child, that she felt like she had to start a new life, alone. I didn't know where she went." "She came to Canada," Sarah said. "She raised me here. She passed when I was 16, cancer. She never talked much about Jamaica." James studied her face. "But she gave you her strength. I can see that." Daniel shifted on the couch. "Uncle, we need to know. Is there any chance?" James sighed. "If Monica had a child in 96, and you, Daniel, were born in 94, he looked between them. It's possible, but we need proof, not just stories." Sarah stood and disappeared into her room. When she returned, she held a small wooden jewelry box. Inside was a folded photo, Monica smiling and heavily pregnant, standing by a faded picket fence. On the back was written, "Sarah, 1996. James looked at it for a long time. He closed his eyes. "It's her handwriting," he said quietly. "It's her." The room fell silent. The next evening, Leah dropped by unannounced with a bag of wine and vegan cupcakes. She grinned as always, but her eyes scanned the room a little too carefully. "Visitor?" she asked, nodding at James. "Yeah," Daniel said. "My uncle. From Jamaica." "Oh, wow, family reunion vibes," Leah smiled, but her voice had a slight edge. "I've never seen you two look this tense." "We're just tired," Sarah said quickly. "Long week." "Mm-hmm." Leah placed the wine on the table and sat on the arm of the couch. "So what's new? You two still Canada's cutest couple or what?" Sarah smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Leah noticed. She always noticed. That night, after Leah left, she lay in bed scrolling through old posts and private voice memos. She replayed clips from dinners, brunches, and random moments she'd recorded for content. And then she played one from Sarah, just weeks earlier, talking about finding a connection between her mother and Daniel's family. Leah sat up slowly. She wasn't sure what the truth was yet, but she was getting close. Chapter 10. The Truth Comes Out. The apartment was too quiet that morning. Sarah stood at the window holding a mug of untouched coffee, watching snow collect on the branches outside. Behind her, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with Uncle James, both staring at the envelope that had just arrived in the mail. Inside it was the DNA test. They had done it together, a swab each, sealed in nervous silence. Now it sat between them, full of answers no one really wanted. James broke the seal. He unfolded the paper slowly, scanning the lines. His hand trembled slightly. Daniel watched him, heart pounding, as if hoping the paper might somehow say what he wanted it to say. James cleared his throat. "You share 49.8% of your DNA, he said quietly. "That means you're not cousins. You're siblings. Half-siblings." The room collapsed into silence. Sarah dropped her coffee. It shattered on the hardwood, but she didn't move. Daniel stood, pacing, his fists clenched and breath shallow. "Are you sure?" James looked at him, pain in his eyes. "I wish I weren't. But it's all here. Monica is your mother's twin, and Sarah is her daughter." Sarah sat slowly on the edge of the couch as if the world had tilted. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. James put a hand on her shoulder. "You didn't know. Neither of you did. This isn't your shame." Daniel leaned against the wall, staring at the rocking horse, the object that brought them together, and somehow had always known the truth. Elsewhere, across town, Leah stared at her screen. She had finally put the puzzle together, scraps of information, snippets of overheard conversations, and what she'd found in Sarah's old family post online. The names matched, the timelines, even the photos. Her stomach churned, but her fingers moved anyway. She uploaded a short blog post to her lifestyle site, masked as a story too strange to be fiction. Names redacted, just enough to keep it anonymous, but specific enough for anyone in Calgary to connect the dots. She shared a blurred image of the rocking horse and included one line that would ignite a fire. "What happens when you fall in love with someone only to discover they're your sibling?" She didn't think it would go viral, but it did. Within hours, the post had thousands of shares. Reddit threads erupted. TikTok sleuths began digging. Comments poured in, speculating. Then someone found a photo Leah had innocently tagged weeks ago, with Sarah and Daniel's full names. It exploded. Back at the apartment, Daniel's phone buzzed, then Sarah's, then again, and again. They checked their notifications, and froze. Rocking horse romance, sibling scandal. This can't be real. They kissed in public. Disgusting. Within hours, their names were trending. Within days, their faces were on the news. Sarah sobbed on the bathroom floor while Daniel stood in the doorway, numb, unable to move. Uncle James made calls to lawyers and friends, trying to shield them from the fallout. But it was too late. Their story was everywhere. They packed in the night, what little they could carry. Daniel held her hand at the bus station. "We need to disappear for a while." Sarah nodded. "Where?" "Anywhere but here." They boarded a greyhound headed east, faces hidden under hoods and sunglasses. The snow fell heavier that night, muffling the sounds of a city that had turned its back on them. No one saw them leave. No one knew where they went. But their story wouldn't die. Chapter 11. Ghosts and Headlines. It had been 3 weeks since Sarah and Daniel vanished, gone from Calgary, gone from social media, gone from each other's day-to-day lives. Sarah had found a small studio apartment in Montreal, tucked above a bookstore in Mile End. The landlord didn't ask questions, and she didn't offer answers. She worked remote gigs, kept her head down, and rarely ventured beyond the corner cafe. Montreal was cold, but it felt quieter than Calgary. Less curious, less judgmental. It was what she needed. Daniel, meanwhile, was in Toronto. He'd found a room to rent in an old house near Queen Street West. The neighbourhood buzzed with art and distraction. He took on freelance graphic design work and avoided conversation. He kept off social media, turned off the news, and told himself that disappearing was the only way to breathe again. They hadn't spoken since they left. Not out of anger, but out of survival. Back in Calgary, their absence only fed the media storm. The headlines got bolder. Sibling lovers disappear after scandal. Rocking horse romance shocks Canada. Where are Sarah and Daniel now? News crews camped outside the old antique store. Internet detectives tracked every photo, every tag, every friend they'd ever had. And in the middle of it all, Leah was starting to feel the burn. At first, she thought exposing the story would blow over like a trending moment, viral, dramatic, but fleeting. But the backlash grew louder. People called her a clout chaser, a fake friend, a traitor. Her inbox was full of hate mail. Her podcast lost sponsors. Her follower count dropped. She told herself she'd done the right thing. But something about the silence Sarah left behind made it hard to sleep. Hundreds of kilometers away, a new story was quietly beginning. Emma was a university student in Halifax, studying digital media and preparing to move across the country to live with her boyfriend Jay in Vancouver. They had met in a student forum and dated long distance for 2 years. Texts, calls, late-night video chats, every connection built across screens. Emma had seen the article about Sarah and Daniel a week ago. At first, it read like a twisted urban legend. But something about it stuck with her. She read it again, and then she called Jay. "I think we need to take a DNA test." Chapter 12. The Other Couple. Emma had always been the careful one. She was the kind of person who checked expiration dates twice, who booked appointments 6 months in advance, who color-coded her calendar and still set extra reminders. Jay was her opposite, easygoing, spontaneous, messy in a charming way. Somehow, it worked. Their long-distance relationship had survived late-night exams, time zone struggles, and moments of doubt. They were planning to move in together in Vancouver by the summer. Until Emma read that article, she couldn't stop thinking about it, the siblings who fell in love by accident, blind to the bloodline they shared. A viral love story turned tragedy. It haunted her, not because it was scandalous, but because it was possible. Emma and Jay knew very little about each other's extended families. Both had single moms who didn't talk much about the past. Emma had never met Jay's father, and Jay only vaguely knew Emma's mother had emigrated from Nigeria in the early 90s. There were missing branches in their trees, forgotten names, old silences. What if? It was a ridiculous question, until it wasn't. "Do you really think it's necessary?" Jay asked over video chat, resting his chin on his hand. "I don't think we're related," Emma said gently, "but I'd rather know. What happened to them? Sarah and Daniel. They didn't ask for it either." Jay leaned back. He wasn't used to seeing Emma this anxious. "Okay," he said finally. "Let's do it." They ordered 2 DNA kits online the next morning. Over the next few weeks, as they waited for the results, Emma dove into their family histories. She pulled out old documents her mum had stuffed in a drawer, immigration papers, school records, faded photographs. Jay did the same, calling relatives he hadn't spoken to in years, asking questions that made some people laugh and others fall silent. The digging wasn't easy. It stirred things they hadn't expected, like how Jay's mom had changed her last name twice, or how Emma's mom wouldn't say who her biological father was. Still, they pressed forward. Not because they were suspicious, because they loved each other, and they didn't want to risk loving in the dark. Meanwhile, Sarah and Daniel's names were still being whispered in quiet corners of the internet. Podcasts referenced them as that couple. TikTokers shared dramatic reenactments. Online sleuths argued about who was to blame. But something deeper was missing. Empathy, truth, understanding. And 1 year later, Emma would be the one to write it. Chapter 13. Small Town, New Names. It had been 4 months since the test results arrived. 4 months since their names dominated headlines and their faces became the cautionary tale of the year. In that time, Sarah had made a quiet life for herself in Montreal. She taught English writing classes online, wrote in her journal daily, and walked the narrow streets near her apartment with a scarf pulled high over her face. She didn't go by Sarah Blake anymore. On paper, she was Sadie Jones. Her therapist said it would take time to untangle grief from guilt. She was beginning to understand what that meant. Then, one grey morning in early spring, someone buzzed her intercom. She froze. No one buzzed her here. "Hello?" she said cautiously. "It's me," came the voice. "Daniel." Her heart stumbled in her chest. She hadn't seen him in over a month. They sat on the park bench near her building, watching pale green buds open on the trees. Daniel looked different, thinner, quieter. The circles under his eyes were darker, but his gaze was still soft when it landed on her. "I had to see you," he said. Sarah nodded. "I'm glad you came." They talked for hours, about Toronto, about Montreal, about their lives now. Daniel worked at a design agency. He was renting a basement suite and barely touched social media. He lived like a ghost. Sarah admitted she did too. "I still care about you," he said. "That hasn't changed." "I know," she whispered. "Me too." They sat in the silence for a long time. "We can't go back," she said finally, "no matter how much we want to." "I know. We're family," she added, voice trembling, "but we can't be more than that." Daniel nodded, his throat tight. "I'm not sure what we're supposed to do with that." Sarah reached for his hand and squeezed it. "Maybe we just survive it. And one day, we tell the truth the right way." He looked down at their intertwined fingers. "Just not now," he said. That night, Sarah wrote in her journal, "Daniel came. I looked into the eyes of the man I loved and saw the brother I never knew I had. And somehow both were real. Both are still real, but one has to be buried for the other to live." Chapter 14. The Test. 1 year later. The headlines had faded, the hashtags stopped trending. The world, as it always did, moved on, but Sarah and Daniel still lived in the shadow. Sarah still walked through Montreal with her head down. She still jumped when a stranger stared too long. Though no one said her name aloud anymore, she felt it in whispers. In the way people hesitated when they thought they recognized her. In the emails that still came through sometimes. Some kind, some cruel. Daniel, meanwhile, stayed off social media entirely. He didn't want to know what people thought. He didn't want to read threads that dissected his trauma, his mistakes, his name. He worked, he read, he kept quiet, he survived. They messaged each other occasionally. Nothing romantic, just check-ins, just proof the other was still there. Neither of them had tried to explain their side, not until someone else did. Emma and Jay stood in the living room of their new apartment in Vancouver, DNA results in hand. Emma took a breath. "Ready?" Jay nodded. She clicked the results open. No genetic relation detected. They weren't related. They never had been. Emma laughed, sharp and loud, full of tension she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. Jay pulled her into a hug, burying his face into her shoulder. "You were right to ask." "I'm just so glad," she whispered. It wasn't just relief. It was knowing they had done what Sarah and Daniel hadn't been able to do, what they never even had the chance to do. That night, Emma sat at her desk with a cup of tea and opened a blank blog post. She didn't want to write clickbait. She didn't want shock value. She wanted truth. She wanted softness. She wanted justice, not in a courtroom sense, but in a human one. Her post was titled, "What We Can Learn from the Siblings Who Fell in Love." She wrote, they didn't know, they didn't choose it. And still they paid the price. Not for a crime, but for a secret that wasn't theirs to keep. Their story haunted me for a year, not because of what happened, but because no one told it with compassion. We think things like this don't happen, that it's impossible. But it's not. When families fall apart, when children are lost in systems, when names change and histories are hidden, this is what's left behind. Silence, shame, and two people who only wanted to love someone. She finished it with a message to them directly. "If you're out there, Sarah and Daniel, I believe you. I forgive you. I'm sorry the world didn't. She clicked publish and let the truth breathe. Chapter 15, Legacy. Sarah wasn't looking for it. She was sipping tea in her Montreal apartment, scrolling absent-mindedly through a blog she followed for its writing prompts and emotional essays, the kind of site that usually gave her comfort. Then she saw the headline, "What We Can Learn from the Siblings Who Fell in Love." Her heart stopped. She clicked. Every word hit her like a quiet wave. Not because it was dramatic, not because it was cruel, because it was kind. Someone had seen them. Really seen them. Not as headlines, not as gossip, not as scandal, but as people who had fallen in love and then fallen into something they never could have imagined. By the time she finished reading, her hands were shaking. She opened her email and typed only 5 words into the subject line. "You need to read this." She attached the link and sent it to the only person she still trusted to receive it. Daniel sat in his Toronto apartment, the sun just beginning to rise outside his window. He hadn't spoken to Sarah in weeks. He didn't expect her name to pop up in his inbox. But it did. No message. Just a link. He hesitated before clicking. But when he did, he read every line. Twice. He closed his laptop slowly, resting his forehead against the table. For the first time in a year, he didn't feel like a monster. He felt like someone who had survived something impossible. He picked up his phone and typed a reply. "Daniel, thank you, I really needed this." The post spread in its own quiet way, not viral, but steady. People began to talk differently. The tone shifted. There were still jokes, still cynics. But in the corners of the internet where empathy lived, something had changed. Sarah began writing again. She started slowly, then steadily, pouring everything she had into a manuscript she had been afraid to name for months. One afternoon in a quiet cafe in Montreal, she finally typed the title, The Secret of the Rocking Horse. Chapter 16, Generations. February 1st, 2025. The kitchen was alive with morning noise. Laughter, cereal bowls clinking, and the squeak of sneakers on tile. Emma leaned against the counter, sipping coffee, watching her daughter Maya chase her little brother Eli around the island. Jay was flipping pancakes with the grace of a DJ spinning records, nodding along to the soft hum of music playing from a speaker tucked near the window. 10 years had passed since that strange, tragic article first shook them. Since Sarah and Daniel's story, half whispered, half viral, had made Emma question everything. But it also changed everything. Back then, Emma and Jay were still just dating, navigating a long-distance relationship built on phone calls, late-night texts, and dreams of one day living under the same roof. After the DNA test confirmed they weren't related, they'd moved quickly. Emma relocated to Vancouver. Jay proposed the following spring. They were married 6 months later in a quiet ceremony by the ocean. No drama, no fanfare, just 2 people saying yes. Now, 10 years later, they had 2 children, a full family photo wall, and no secrets. Emma never forgot what could have been. She'd made it her mission to ensure her children knew everyone, aunts, uncles, cousins, great-grandparents. They'd created a digital family tree together and updated it every year. They hosted a cousin weekend every summer and collected stories from older relatives for a scrapbook Maya and Eli could one day pass on. It wasn't just about history. It was about connection, about roots. The kind of roots Sarah and Daniel never had. After breakfast, they took a family trip to the downtown library. Eli made a beeline for the Lego table while Maya browsed picture books. Emma wandered through the non-fiction shelves, her hand gliding over spines like she was searching for something without knowing what. And then she saw it. The Secret of the Rocking Horse by Sarah Blake. Her breath caught in her throat. The cover was simple. A white rocking horse on a shadowed wood floor, sunlight pouring in from a nearby window. She picked it up gently, thumbing through the pages. A worn sticker on the inside cover read, "Donated by a reader who said this book changed their life." Jay stepped beside her, eyebrows raised. "Is that—" She nodded. "It's her. It's the book." He took it from her hands and read a passage aloud. "We didn't fall in love with our blood. We fell in love with each other. And that's what made it so hard to let go." They stood there for a long time. Jay exhaled slowly. She really wrote it. Emma smiled sadly. She really lived it. That night, after the kids were in bed, Emma placed the library copy on her nightstand and opened to chapter 1. For the second time in her life, Sarah and Daniel's story would change everything. Chapter 17. After the Storm. Sarah was 29 now. She lived in Ottawa, in a quiet neighbourhood with old brick homes and wide tree-lined streets. Her days were full but peaceful, morning walks with her daughter Ava, and evenings curled up with manuscripts she edited for aspiring writers. Her husband, Thomas, worked in social policy, and they had a rhythm that felt earned, not borrowed. But even with the life she built, that story still lived inside her. Not as shame, not anymore, but as a truth too big to forget. She had published The Secret of the Rocking Horse 5 years ago, after nearly 3 years of writing in secret. It wasn't easy. She cried through the first draft. She hesitated to send it to her publisher. She almost backed out when the media got wind of it. But the release had been quiet, intentional. No interviews, no fanfare, just the book. And slowly it had found its people, students, therapists, estranged siblings, anyone carrying a story too heavy for a headline. It never became a bestseller, but it didn't need to. It was read, and it was believed. Daniel was 31, living in Vancouver now. He'd never married, but he co-parented a bright, thoughtful 7-year-old boy named Luca with his longtime partner, Naomi. He worked full-time as an artist. His gallery pieces were abstract, saturated in colour, shadow, and memory. Some were messy and chaotic. Others were quiet and contained, as if they whispered instead of screamed. He never promoted his work with his name front and centre. He didn't need to. The people who connected with it found their way to him. He and Sarah kept in touch. Birthdays, holidays, the occasional message about their kids. Their connection hadn't disappeared. It had just changed. And grown. A few nights after Emma found the book in the library, she and Jay read it together by lamplight, passing it back and forth like a shared memory. When they reached the final chapters, Sarah donating the rocking horse the moment she said goodbye to Daniel in Montreal, they sat in silence. Jay's voice cracked. That chapter, where she says, "We didn't bury the love. We just stopped asking it to carry what it couldn't hold." Emma touched his hand. "I think that's the bravest thing she ever wrote." Jay nodded. "They didn't get a happy ending." "No," Emma said, "but they found a new one." And somewhere on a quiet street in Ottawa, Sarah tucked Ava into bed and opened her laptop. She started writing something new. This time, it wasn't about the past. It was about what came after. Chapter 18. The Museum. The museum was quiet the morning of the exhibit launch, just the way Sarah preferred it. She stood in the foyer of the Canadian Heritage of Family History's exhibit at the National Museum in Ottawa, watching as a team of curators carefully positioned the rocking horse under soft museum-grade lights. The plaque below it read, "The Rocking Horse, 20th Century, Jamaica, Calgary, Montreal. Donated by Sarah Blake. Artifact linked to a widely circulated true story of love, loss, and family secrets rediscovered." It didn't need more detail. The ones who knew would know. The horse had been kept in Sarah's storage unit for years. She couldn't bring herself to throw it away, but she couldn't keep it near her either. When the museum approached her after reading her book, it felt right. It belonged to the public now, to the story, not the wound. Daniel arrived 10 minutes after the doors opened, dressed in his usual quiet style, earth tones, hands in his coat pockets, hair a little longer than the last time Sarah had seen him. She turned as he stepped into the exhibit. Their eyes met. They smiled. It was the kind of smile you gave someone who once broke your heart, someone who helped you put it back together afterward. "Hey," she said. "Hey," he echoed, stepping beside her. They stood together in front of the rocking horse for a long time. "She still has that same expression," Daniel murmured, "like she knows everything and isn't telling." Sarah laughed. "She always did." After the small unveiling, they moved to a nearby cafe to talk in private. No press, no audience, just two people sharing time that used to be impossible. "I read your book again last week," Daniel said. "Still hits me like the first time." "I've had letters," she replied. "Some kind, some not. But mostly, people get it." "They should," he said. "You didn't write it to be understood. You wrote it to be honest." Sarah nodded, suddenly emotional. "Ava asked me the other day why I donated the horse. I told her, because I used to love someone who loved it too." Daniel looked out the window. "My son saw the museum flyer," he said. "He doesn't know the whole story yet. But when he's older, I'll tell him. The real version." "I'll do the same," Sarah said. They sat in silence for a while, sipping coffee. "I brought something," Daniel said finally, pulling 2 envelopes from his coat. "One's from me, the other's from Luca." Sarah blinked. "Luca?" "He wanted to write to Ava. Said he felt like they had something in common." Sarah smiled as she opened the envelope. Inside was a drawing, a rocking horse flying through clouds, 2 stick-figure kids holding on with wide grins. Her chest tightened. "That's beautiful," she said. Daniel nodded. "I think this is what healing looks like." Later, as Sarah walked back through the museum with the letter in her coat pocket, she passed the rocking horse one more time. A young couple stood in front of it, reading the plaque, whispering quietly to each other. Sarah didn't stop them. She just walked by and smiled. The story was no longer hers to carry alone. Chapter 19. Echoes. Emma adjusted the microphone in her home studio, waiting for the light to go green. Jay walked by behind her, carrying a tray of snacks for the kids, and gave her a quiet thumbs up. Maya and Eli were already in their rooms with headphones on, trained experts now at Mommy's podcast time. This episode was different, more personal, more vulnerable. It had been almost 10 years since she first stumbled on Sarah and Daniel's story, and now it was time to close the circle. The recorder clicked on. "Hey, friends," Emma said gently. "Today's episode isn't about parenting, family planning, or family trees, though in a way it's about all of those. Today I want to talk about legacy, and about the courage it takes to tell a story that almost destroyed you." The episode was structured like a letter. She spoke to her listeners, but it felt more like she was speaking to Sarah and Daniel directly. She recounted how she and Jay had discovered the original article, how that story inspired them to take a DNA test, how it helped them avoid what could have been the greatest mistake of their lives. "But it didn't just save us," Emma said. "It transformed us. Because from that point on, we decided there would be no more hidden truths in our family, no half-answered questions. We made a map of who we are. And now our children will never have to wonder." She paused. Sarah and Daniel didn't choose what happened to them, but they chose what came next. And Sarah chose to write it down, not just for herself, but for all of us, for anyone who's ever felt ashamed for loving deeply and blindly. An hour later, thousands of people were listening, and one of them was Daniel. He sat alone in his art studio, Luca colouring nearby on the floor. His son looked up occasionally, curious about his father's expression. "Did that really happen to you?" Luca asked. Daniel nodded slowly. "Yes." "Did it hurt?" "Yes." "Do you still think about it?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Sometimes. But it's different now." "Because it's over?" "No," he said gently. because it taught me how to begin again. Emma ended the episode with a final quote from Sarah's book, "Some truths destroy, but others set you free. We were both." Sarah listened too, sitting at her desk as the afternoon light poured in, Ava drawing rainbows at the kitchen table. When the episode ended, Sarah reached for her pen. She opened the back cover of a fresh copy of The Secret of the Rocking Horse and wrote, "For the ones who carry their stories quietly, may this give you permission to speak aloud. Sarah Blake." She closed the book and slid it into an envelope. One more gift for someone who needed it. Chapter 20. Old Flames. Leah Moreno hadn't posted in a while, not the way she used to, back when likes and comments fed her like air, when her podcast had sponsors and her face was recognizable in downtown Calgary, when she broke the story that made her infamous. Sarah and Daniel. 10 years ago, she'd been their friend, their third wheel, the one who smiled at brunches and listened to their secrets. And then she'd posted it. At the time, she convinced herself it was the right thing. "The truth deserves light," she'd said on a now-deleted live stream. "Even if it burns." But she hadn't expected the fire to turn on her too. The backlash was immediate. Brands dropped her, followers turned, hate mail flooded in. She'd deleted her accounts more than once. Rebuilt, rebranded, faded into the algorithm. But some people still believed her, still thanked her. They filled her DMs with praise. "You saved them from making it worse. You did what had to be done. You're a hero." That tiny group of believers, they kept her alive. And now, in 2025, Leah was ready to reignite the flame. She returned to social media with a cryptic post. "Some stories never die, especially when the lies keep growing. What if I told you the forbidden couple had kids, with each other?" They never stopped. Sarah and Daniel exposed. The comment section exploded. Some laughed it off, others believed, and Leah kept feeding them. Photos taken out of context, blurry screenshots, fabricated sources, speculative videos edited to suggest secret meetings. She didn't care if it was true. She cared that people were listening again, that she mattered again. Her follower count grew by the hour. Influencers began to pick up the thread. Old drama channels resurfaced the story with fresh commentary. What if Leah was right all along? 10 years later, the rocking horse romance rides again. And just like that, the ashes began to smolder. Meanwhile, Sarah was tucking Ava into bed. She hadn't checked her phone in hours. Daniel was painting by lamplight while Luca read comics beside him. Neither of them knew yet, but the storm was coming. Again. Chapter 21. Reclaimed. The first wave was just a few comments. Then came the TikToks. Then the podcast exclusives. Then the headlines, louder, crueler, more invasive than before. Do Sarah and Daniel have a child together? Forbidden romance. Are the siblings still hiding a secret? Leah Moreno speaks again, and she's naming names. Sarah stared at her phone in horror, heart sinking with every scroll. Her daughter Ava's school photo was now floating across Reddit threads and gossip blogs, people debating her features, analysing her smile, speculating whose child she really was. She threw her phone across the room and buried her face in her hands. In Vancouver, Daniel was pacing his apartment, jaw clenched, thoughts racing. He had tried to ignore the noise at first, but the moment someone tagged his son's name online, everything changed. He yanked the curtains closed and shut down every browser tab. It was happening again. No matter how far they ran, no matter how long it had been, the world still saw them as a headline. He felt sick. Not because of the story, because of what it was doing to their kids. That night, Sarah and Daniel spoke over video call, both visibly shaken. "Have you told Luca?" Sarah asked, her voice hollow. "No." Daniel said. He's too young, but I can feel it coming. The questions. Sarah rubbed her forehead. Ava came home crying today. Someone in her class said they saw me on YouTube, called her Rocking Horse Baby. She broke down. Daniel didn't speak. He just watched her cry, his own face tight with fury. She's a child, Daniel. She didn't choose this. None of us did. Leah kept posting. Now she was showing screenshots of alleged emails, old photos of Sarah and Daniel at the antique shop, heavily edited and labelled, "Look at how they're standing. You don't hug your brother like this." She was relentless. And it was working. Again. People were reaching out to Sarah's publisher. Rumours began circling about pulling her memoir from school reading lists. Daniel's art studio received anonymous messages accusing him of being a pervert, a liar, a danger. 10 years. 10 years they had stayed quiet. 10 years they had healed. And it was all unravelling. "I can't go through this again," Sarah said quietly that night. "Not like before." Daniel nodded, swallowing hard. They sat in silence for a long time, until Sarah finally said, "We need help." Daniel looked up. "Who would even believe us now?" Sarah stared at the screen. "I know someone who will." Chapter 22. The Ones Who Stayed. The message Sarah sent was simple. "It's happening again. I don't know what to do." Emma read it late at night, the glow of her phone illuminating the bedroom while Jay snored softly beside her. She didn't reply immediately. Instead, she sat there with the weight of the past pressing down on her chest. 10 years of silence, 10 years of peace, 10 years since she and Jay first found Sarah's story tucked into a library shelf. And 10 years since they'd become friends. It started with a letter. Emma had read The Secret of the Rocking Horse in one sitting. She cried 3 times, underlined half the book, and then wrote Sarah an email. "You don't know me, but your story changed mine. I think we would understand each other. If you ever want to talk, I'm here." Sarah had hesitated at first, unsure of the woman behind the screen. But something about Emma's message, its warmth, its lack of judgment, broke through. They met on a video call 2 weeks later, then in person, then over dinner. And Jay, curious and kind, fit into their circle like he'd always been meant to. Over the years, Emma and Jay became something rare. Friends who didn't want anything. No gossip, no validation, just space, understanding, truth. They knew everything. The pain, the history, the moments Sarah and Daniel didn't dare share publicly. They were the ones who stayed. Now, a decade later, Emma sent one line back to Sarah. "I'm coming." By the next evening, she and Jay were in Ottawa. They walked into Sarah's house just as Daniel arrived from Vancouver. The reunion was quiet. No dramatic hugs, no tears. Just heavy eyes and the kind of silence you only share with people who already know the worst parts of you. Emma opened her laptop and pulled out a folder labelled Contingency. Sarah blinked. You prepared for this?" Emma nodded. "I didn't want to believe it would happen. But Leah, she never really left. She was just waiting." Jay chimed in, voice calm but firm. "We've got you, both of you and your kids." Emma turned the screen toward them. On it was a pre-drafted article. Title, 10 Years Later, The Story You Thought You Knew. "I started it last year," Emma admitted. "After the museum, I thought maybe someday someone would try to twist it again. And when they did, I didn't want the first voice people heard to be Leah's." Daniel stared at the screen, jaw tight. "You're really doing this for us?" Emma met his eyes. "You told your truth once. Let me help you protect it." They worked through the night, cross-checked dates, added context, included photos of their separate families, even included legal clarifications about the DNA results, something no one had ever shown publicly. Jay drafted a timeline. Emma wrote the closing paragraph. Sarah and Daniel approved every word. This time there would be no half-truths. No shame. No room for doubt. The next morning they posted it together, on Emma's blog, on Sarah's website, and across Daniel's art page. The headline was clean and clear. They are not hiding, you just weren't listening. Underneath it, photos of Ava and Luca playing together like cousins, smiling and free. No secrets, just life. It spread faster than Leah's lies. Because this time, people were listening to the right voice. And for the first time in a long time, Sarah and Daniel didn't feel like they were defending themselves. They were simply living. Chapter 23. When the Dust Settles. The morning after Emma's article went live, Sarah opened her inbox expecting hate. Instead, she found compassion. I had a brother I didn't know about until I was 27. Thank you for this. Your story helped me forgive my parents for what they hid. You're not alone anymore. She read each one slowly, her eyes blurring with tears. Daniel called later that day. I'm getting letters too, he said. Real ones, in the mail. What are people saying? He paused. That we made it through something they didn't think was survivable. Sarah smiled. We did. The internet wasn't all kind, of course. It never was. Some still clung to Leah's lies. Some said the article was a PR stunt. But their voices were quieter now, easier to tune out. Because for the first time, the truth wasn't hiding. It was front and center. And this time, people chose to believe it. Emma and Jay stayed a few more days. They helped manage the incoming press. They coordinated a follow-up blog post answering common questions. They even got a legal takedown of Leah's doctored images in motion. But more than anything, they helped bring Sarah and Daniel back to life. There were dinners with their families, quiet walks, long talks, laughter, healing. And one night, sitting around the kitchen table, Jay said something that stopped them all. You know, what if we did more than just protect your story? What if we helped other people find theirs? They all looked at him. He was serious. Emma leaned in. Like, a platform? Something that helps people find the family they lost or never knew they had? Sarah blinked. You mean, stop something like this from happening again? Daniel nodded slowly. A place where people can build family trees, trace DNA, share records, before it's too late. The room went still. Then Emma smiled. I think we're onto something. Chapter 24, Unfollowed. Leah Moreno had spent 10 years trying to stay relevant. She launched podcasts, hosted live streams, started healing retreats. All of it built on half-truths, speculation, and thinly veiled jabs at the people she once called friends. But when Emma's article went live, and when the truth hit harder than Leah expected, the tide turned. Fast, but no one was listening anymore. Even the people who once supported her were gone. The story she'd tried to twist no longer belonged to her. It belonged to the people who lived it. And they were finally writing the ending. 6 months later, the startup launched. Root and Thread. A platform for discovering family connections, uncovering lost history, and building truth from the ground up. Emma handled communications and storytelling, bringing warmth and empathy to every project. Jay managed tech and user experience, designing intuitive tools to build and link family trees. Daniel oversaw creative direction. He designed the logo, a branching tree inside a spinning wheel, reminiscent of the rocking horse's curved runners. And Sarah. Sarah served as lead researcher and advisor, working with genealogists and historians. She curated workshops, wrote learning materials, and developed a toolkit for parents on how to share complex family truths with their children. Their mission was simple, because the past shouldn't be a mystery, especially when it holds your future. The press came quickly, but this time it wasn't scandal. It was celebration. From viral infamy to family legacy, the team behind Root and Thread. How a memoir sparked a movement. When healing becomes a business, the platform helping families find themselves. They held a launch event in Montreal. No cameras, just people. People who had found long-lost siblings. People who'd discovered cousins they never knew existed. People who no longer felt ashamed of what they'd never been told. And in the corner of the event, surrounded by light laughter and quiet music, sat the rocking horse. Still, steady, free. Chapter 25, Quiet Threads. It started with a message. Because of your platform, I found my birth father. Then another. We discovered we had a half-sister. She lives 20 minutes from us. Then dozens more. From around the world. Quiet voices, whispered relief, joyful reunions and painful truths, all uncovered with the help of Root and Thread. Emma kept a board in the office filled with sticky notes, each colour-coded by story. Reunions, reconciliations, discoveries, questions still unanswered. The board grew fast, faster than anyone expected. Sarah sat at her desk one evening, reading one of the platform's case studies. A young woman in Nova Scotia who found 3 siblings across 2 provinces. Her mother had passed, leaving behind only a name, and through the site they'd found the rest of the puzzle. She wiped a tear away. I never thought we'd make something like this, she whispered to herself. But she was proud. Root and Thread was no longer just about avoiding tragedy. It was about building bridges that had been lost for decades. Daniel was in Vancouver painting a mural for a local community centre. The wall was already halfway done, silhouettes of people reaching toward branches, their fingertips touching the edges of glowing threads that formed leaves. It was his tribute to the lives they helped reconnect. As he worked, his son Luca stood nearby, holding a brush of his own. Why do you paint trees all the time? Luca asked. Daniel smiled. Because trees remind people they're part of something bigger. Luca dipped his brush in paint. Like family? Exactly. That weekend, the 4 of them, Emma, Jay, Sarah, and Daniel, met in Toronto for a live storytelling event. They called it Tangled Roots, Stories of Family Lost and Found. People filled the small theatre space, candles on every table, no cameras, no press. Just stories. One by one, guests stood up and shared. A man who found his twin brother after 38 years. A woman who learned she'd been adopted through Root and Thread and tracked down her birth family. A teenager who used the platform to reunite her grandmother with a long-lost cousin in Nigeria. Each story ended in quiet applause, in tears, in laughter. And at the end, Emma invited Sarah and Daniel to speak. The room fell silent. Sarah stepped forward first. There was a time I thought our story would be the end of everything. She glanced at Daniel, who nodded. But now I see it was the beginning of something so much bigger. It wasn't just about us. It was about every secret buried, every name forgotten, every person who thought they'd never understand where they came from. Daniel added softly, We were never trying to be brave. We just didn't want to hide anymore. Afterward, a young man approached them. I just found my brother through your site, he said. We're meeting next week. I was scared before I came here, but after hearing you speak, I'm not anymore. Sarah smiled and shook his hand. That's why we built it. Later that night, in the quiet of the hotel hallway, Sarah turned to Daniel. Do you think they'll ever stop seeing us as them? Daniel shrugged, a soft smile tugging at his lips. I don't know, but I don't think we care anymore. And she realized he was right. They weren't running from their past. They were building something out of it. Chapter 26. Letters Never Sent. The letter was tucked inside Sarah's old journal, faded and folded twice. She had written it during the worst of the media firestorm, back when she and Daniel had disappeared and silence felt like survival. It was addressed to no one. And everyone. I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know if I'll ever stop loving you or stop wishing we had never met. I wish someone had warned us. I wish we'd been told the truth. But even if I could rewrite it all, I don't think I would. She closed the journal softly, tears catching in her throat. Now, 10 years later, her truth had changed. Daniel had his own collection of letters, sketchbooks filled with drawings of things he couldn't say. One page showed 2 trees growing side by side, their roots tangling beneath the surface. Another was just the outline of a rocking horse with the words, "We didn't ride it into ruin, we rode it toward the truth." That weekend, Uncle James returned to Canada. He stepped off the plane with a suitcase in one hand and a bottle of white rum in the other. When he hugged Sarah, she cried. When he hugged Daniel, he clapped him on the back and said, "Me proud of you, me boy. You made something out of fire." They brought him to the Root and Thread office and showed him everything: the message board, the family tree network, the workshop series, the testimonials. He stood in the center of the space, his hands on his hips, eyes glistening. "You didn't just help strangers," he said. "You helped us. Back home, the family in Jamaica. They read your book, they watched your interview, and for the first time in decades, we talked. We told stories that were buried deep. We let go of some shame. You brought your people back together." Daniel's voice cracked. "That's all we ever wanted." Sarah smiled. "And it all started with a rocking horse." That night, they sat around the kitchen table, sipping tea as snow began falling outside. Uncle James reached into his coat and pulled out a yellowed photo, a black and white image of a young woman in a floral dress sitting on a carved wooden horse. "That's your grandmother," he said, laying the photo gently on the table. Sarah and Daniel leaned in, eyes wide. James continued, "Back in Jamaica, your grandfather walked into an old antique shop one day, heartbroken, tired, quiet. And there she was, riding that rocking horse like she was floating. He said in that moment he knew, just knew. Bought it on the spot." Sarah laughed. "You're telling me our grandfather fell in love with our grandmother because of a rocking horse?" James chuckled. "Me nah make it up. That was our family's love story long before yours." Daniel shook his head, smiling. "I can't believe that same story is what brought us together." Sarah looked at him, then at James. Full circle. "Full legacy," James corrected. Chapter 27. The Story Behind the Horse. The fire crackled in the corner of Sarah's living room as Uncle James leaned back in his chair, hands cradling a steaming mug of cinnamon tea. Snow dusted the windowsills. Ava and Luca were asleep upstairs after an evening of cookies, laughter, and bedtime stories from Great Uncle James. Now, it was time for one more story. Theirs. "It was 1964, James began, eyes drifting to a memory only he could see. "Your grandfather was a quiet man, kept to himself. He'd just finished working 2 years straight on a banana plantation after his father died. Hadn't smiled in months, but he had this curiosity for antiques, used to say, 'Things with stories are better than things with shine.'" Sarah grinned. "Sounds like someone I know." Daniel nudged her with a smile, then turned back to James. "One day he walked into a tiny shop outside Mandeville. Didn't know what he was looking for. And then he saw her, your grandmother, sitting on this old wooden rocking horse, just laughing with her head thrown back like she didn't have a care in the world. He said," James added, tapping the table for emphasis, "I knew from the moment I saw her, this woman would be the mother of my children, and I knew I'd never let her ride that horse alone again." Sarah let out a soft laugh, eyes wide. "Seriously?" "That's how they met." "Dead serious. He bought the horse on the spot and brought it to her home the next day. He handcrafted the horse with his own designs after he bought it, and said it was hers, just like his heart, and she kept it until the day she died. Daniel leaned forward. And then it passed to Monica? James nodded. Your grandmother gave it to her after she turned 6. It was her favorite toy. She used to say it was magical, like it had a memory of everyone who ever loved on it. Sarah looked down, her voice soft. And then she brought it here. Carried it all the way to Canada when she left. Said if she was going to raise a child away from her family, she'd at least have something that remembered where she came from. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Daniel chuckled. That horse really pulled a full romance loop on us. Sarah grinned, leaning back. You're telling me. Our grandfather met our grandmother because of it. Then Monica brought it here, and I met you while sitting on it. James raised his mug with a gleam in his eye. That rocking horse might be the real main character in this whole story. They all laughed. Deep, honest laughter that echoed through the room like music. Later that night, after James had gone to bed, Sarah and Daniel stood quietly in the museum's gallery where the rocking horse was displayed. It looked timeless there, proud, worn, home. We really did come full circle, huh? Daniel said. Sarah nodded. Maybe that's what healing looks like, returning to the beginning, but seeing it through new eyes. Daniel glanced at her. I think it looks like this. And together they stood in front of the horse that had brought them together and carried generations of love before them. Chapter 28. Ava's Question. It was a quiet Sunday morning in Ottawa. Sarah was sipping tea on the back porch while Ava played on the floor beside her, sketching pictures in her notebook. A light breeze moved through the maple trees, the sun warm enough to trick the skin into thinking spring had arrived early. Mom? Ava asked without looking up. Sarah hummed in response. That rocking horse in the museum, it's ours, right? Sarah paused. It wasn't the first time Ava had asked about the horse, but something in her tone this time, curious, thoughtful, older, made Sarah set her cup down. Yes, she said gently. It used to be ours. It belonged to your great-grandmother, then to your grandmother Monica, then to me. Ava stopped sketching. But why is it in the museum now? Sarah looked out across the yard, her breath catching for just a moment. Because it has a story, she said. A long one. And stories like that, they don't belong in closets. They belong where other people can learn from them. Ava's brows knit. Is that why you wrote the book? Sarah smiled faintly. Yeah, that's part of it. Ava set her pencil down and looked up at her mother. Did something bad happen with the horse? Sarah blinked. The question was innocent, but it carried the weight of everything they'd ever been through. She took a breath, and then she told her daughter the truth. I met someone when I was younger, she said softly. Someone I didn't know I was related to. And we cared about each other a lot before we found out the truth. Ava listened, quiet as a breath. We were both good people. We didn't know. But when the truth came out, the world wasn't very kind to us. People said awful things. They tried to make us feel small. Ava frowned. That's mean. Sarah chuckled. It was. But over time we learned that telling the truth, our truth, was the only way to grow past it. She reached over and tucked a curl behind Ava's ear. That horse. It brought us together. It also reminded us where we came from. And now, it's helping other families learn about where they come from too. Ava tilted her head. So? It's kind of like a time traveler? Sarah laughed, heart warming. Exactly like that. That evening, after Ava went to bed, Sarah pulled out her journal. She wrote, Today, Ava asked about the rocking horse, and I told her the truth. Not the scandal, not the headlines. The truth. About love, mistakes, growth, family. It didn't feel like a wound anymore, just a scar that tells the story of where we've been. In Vancouver, Daniel received a message from Sarah. Ava asked. I told her. It was easier than I thought. Daniel stared at the message for a long time before replying. Luca's starting to ask too. Maybe it's time we let them write their own part of the story. Chapter 29. Luca's Letter. Daniel had always wondered when the questions would come. Luca was thoughtful, introspective, more the type to observe than to speak. But lately, he'd been watching his father a little differently, listening more closely, asking half-formed questions about family, about history, about why certain things weren't talked about often. Then one night, after brushing his teeth and tucking himself into bed, Luca looked at Daniel and asked softly, "Dad, is Ava my cousin?" Daniel blinked. It was like time folded in on itself. He sat on the edge of Luca's bed and nodded. "Yes, she is." Luca frowned. "So, how come we never talk about her story?" Daniel exhaled. "Because it's a complicated story, but that doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it took a long time to understand." Luca was quiet for a moment. "Can I write her a letter?" Daniel smiled. "I think that's a great idea." The next morning, Daniel found Luca at the kitchen table, tongue sticking out in concentration, pencil in hand. He'd written in careful printed letters, "Dear Ava, my name is Luca. I know we're cousins, and I think your mum and my dad are really brave. I read about the rocking horse. I think it's cool that it brought our families together. Maybe one day I can visit the museum with you and we can see it together. I like drawing and playing music. What do you like to do?" From Luca. Daniel read the letter twice, blinking back tears. He scanned it, attached it to an email, and sent it to Sarah with one line. From one child to another. Ava received the letter that evening. She read it once, then again. Then she got out her markers and wrote a reply on pink construction paper. "Hi, Luca. I like your letter. I love music too. I play piano, and I love painting animals. I've seen the rocking horse lots of times. It's big and old and awesome. You should come see it with me sometime. My mum says our story is like a book that keeps going. Maybe we can write the next chapter. From your cousin, Ava." A few days later, the two families set up a video call. Luca and Ava waved awkwardly at first, then started laughing at each other's silly jokes. They talked about favourite colours, pets, weird dreams, and what they wanted to be when they grew up. But somewhere in that easy, beautiful chaos, something changed. The weight of the past lifted just a little more. Not erased, not forgotten. Just handed off to the ones who would carry it differently. Later that night, Sarah texted Daniel. "Maybe they'll teach the world what we couldn't," Daniel replied. "Or maybe they'll never have to." Chapter 30. The Rocking Horse. The museum was quiet again. Sarah walked through the familiar hallway, Ava's hand wrapped in hers. The exhibit hadn't changed much. Still the soft lighting, still the worn plaque, still the gentle reverence in the air. But Sarah had changed. She didn't flinch when people whispered. She didn't look over her shoulder. She simply walked straight toward the rocking horse. Ava was older now, more curious. She moved closer to the display and studied the wooden curves, the chipped paint on the ear, the faint groove in the runner where years of use had smoothed the edge. "Does it feel weird to see it here?" Ava asked. Sarah smiled. "No, not anymore." Ava looked up. "Why did you love this horse so much?" Sarah knelt beside her daughter, her eyes soft. "Because it carried our story," she said. "It reminded us where we came from. And even though it didn't always take us where we thought we were going, it never let us forget who we were." She reached into her bag and pulled out a copy of her book. Clean, new, the cover slightly embossed with the rocking horse silhouette. Inside, she had written a fresh note. "If you've ever felt lost, know this. You're not alone. We found our way back. Sarah Blake." She slid the book into the empty space on the shelf beside the display. a quiet gift to the next person who might need it. Ava watched her closely. "Can I ride a rocking horse like that one day?" Sarah chuckled. "Maybe not this one, but you'll ride your own, in your own way." Across the country in Vancouver, Daniel stood in his art studio, paint on his hands, canvas in front of him. He had been working on this piece for weeks, slowly, layer by layer. It was unlike anything he'd done before. At the center, a white rocking horse. Not in shadow, not hidden. It stood in a field of blooming jasmine, surrounded by golden threads that stretched across the canvas, connecting stars, trees, roots, and silhouettes of people holding hands. He called it Legacy. Luca watched from the doorway. "Is that the horse?" Daniel nodded. "It is." Luca stepped into the studio and whispered, "I think it's the best thing you've ever painted." Daniel smiled. "Me too." Later that evening, Sarah sent a photo of the book resting next to the rocking horse. Daniel replied with a photo of the painting. Neither of them said anything else. They didn't need to. The story had already been told.